Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we will start with approval of the agenda.
Madam President, I move we approve the agenda as presented with the following amendments. 1, additional certified and classified personnel actions for consideration, item number E-3. 2, move item number E-6-E, resolution waiving the requirements of accounting and auditing on the basis of generally accepted accounting principles and fixed asset accounting to item number G-6, new business. And number 3, remove number G-5, new business, review neutral tax rate for the 2022-2023 annual budget.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passed. Any public comment? Okay. We will move on to the election of Board of Education President, Vice President. And I will declare that the nominations for the office of, I can't read today, the Board of Education President are in order. Did I do that correctly or did I miss something? Okay.
I'd like to make a nomination.
Okay,
I would like to nominate you, that we continue with the current board president.
I would second that.
yes. Are there any other nominations? I was thinking there was another step in there.
Okay, sorry.
I haven't done this part before.
Thank
you.
If I may,
Mhm.
at the risk of, I don't mean to cut anybody off,
No, no.
but in the wealth of silence there, I would move that we cease the nominations and cast a unanimous ballot. For
Second on that.
Okay, second. Or is everybody?
Motion and a second. Any discussion?
The only discussion I would offer is that 6 months or so ago, we were thinking in these terms. And so I'm just sort of going off of that.
Do you accept that nomination?
Okay, all in favor? Say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passed. So direct me here.
Nomination for vice president.
Vice President is next because
I make a motion.
we for unanimous ballot. Okay.
I would make a motion that Dana would continue as vice president.
I'll second.
Okay. Any other nominations?
I would move that we cease nominations for vice president and cast a unanimous ballot accordingly.
Is there a second? Any discussion on that? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay. Stay in our chairs then. Motion passed.
Congratulations.
Sorry I made that so difficult. I didn't practice that before I got here. Hey, any correspondence? We will move on to the consent agenda.
Madam President, I move we approve the consent agenda as presented.
Is there a second? Second by John. And any discussion?
Yes. A couple of items there. One, this is just an item of clarification. I think there is a reorganizational chart that is included within that material. And traditionally, the way you write an org chart is you put, say, an individual and then you put a line under them to who they supervise. And I just noticed that that particular org chart, it's sort of self-apparent, but I think for our new Director of Human Resources, the org chart there, it looks like, for example, I think Director of Food Services is supervising transportation. And I think what was really intended there is for those lines to be sideways and not up and down. And that's just a point of clarification. I thought it was obvious, but normally on a org chart, you would do that a different way, so.
Any questions on that?
I have one other item. I think later on, we're going to have a presentation by Mr. Guyman on the reorganization of SPED. And I'm presuming that in the personnel actions, nothing in what we're acting on under the consent agenda has to do with that. Because otherwise, that's sort of an action before a presentation, and I kind of like to have a presentation first.
I don't think that's correct. I think that there's things in the consent agenda that are.
So part of the
So do we need to
reorganization
remove
is
that?
within that action.
Yes, sir. It was my understanding that it was just a presentation, that we weren't going to vote on that. That's why I did it that way, Mr. Rude. But
Oh, and that could be a point of clarification.
The reorg of those positions is not.
It's under new business, and so that's usually new business. And so that's why I was wanting a clarification.
it was under new business. But my understanding, it was just a presentation, that it wouldn't be voted on. But am I correct?
Yeah, that's correct. It's information.
Yeah, it's informational. It is new business, it's informational only, but it's not. This is our projection of what could and would be done with the SPED positions. So it's not.
It's going to be an interesting presentation, and it's a big job, and you know, a lot of kudos and concerns. So with that, I'll probably be voting against the consent agenda on that item for that.
Show me where that's
I
at,
know, I
'cause
was
I
looking
can't spot it
for
right
it.
now.
On the personnel actions.
Oh, personnel, yes, yes. Okay.
Certified. It's one of
I
those,
didn't realize that one.
it's one of those interesting traditions where
Right.
things happen by action of the board. And so the board did it. And so on this aspect of what we're doing something before we understand what we're doing, I think. So that's my concern.
Sorry, I should have had that.
It may ultimately not be a big concern, but I still want to know before I.
Yeah, no, I think that's important.
So I think,
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be presenting that anyway, as far as the district discipline plan and then the SPED restructure, right?
Yes, sir.
So we can do that now, if that's what we're talking about. So we're
well,
discussing.
there's several options there. We could delay that part of the consent agenda
Right.
until after the presentation. That might be
I
cleaner
think that would be
than
the easiest way.
disrupting the whole. Just a thought there, Mr. Superintendent, don't mean to.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I'd recommend, that we remove that, strike that item, and then vote on the rest of the consent agenda.
It's kind of awkward because it's just the personnel actions relating to that activity. Maybe it's cleaner just to delay the,
Well, that's going to be certified and classified both. So it'll probably be easier just to remove all of that for now.
But if we approve it after the presentation, I mean, they all get approved
Yeah.
still,
Mhm.
so.
right, it's just, we're changing
Just
that aspect of our business to a later spot in the agenda.
if it's allowable, I'm in agreement.
The other option is so note my objection, but go ahead and approve it anyway. I mean, it's the-
Well, but I
it's your
agree with you.
pleasure.
I think it would be important to hear it
And I
or
think
to
it,
approve.
yeah, and it's a precedent that we're setting too, that we make decisions before we hear.
Now, is that something that we were prepared to approve tonight? Was that part of the plan, or you didn't think so? You thought it was a
Well, it just hasn't been
presentation only?
presented yet.
Yeah, my understanding was that it was just a presentation, just informational for you all. So,
Your approval comes in the consent agenda in moving the personnel around. So there isn't an action that needs to be taken on his presentation.
Okay.
It's through the consent agenda.
So what happens if we delay the approving of this personnel change and wait till the next meeting?
Then there is an action that follows subsequent to the presentation.
We can just make an action.
It's just a different spot in the agenda.
That's what I was thinking.
So we have a motion on the table currently.
Yeah, so I guess based on what we've learned, I would like to amend the motion to include what we just discussed, a delay of personnel actions relating to that presentation until after the presentation.
So I should move to approve the consent agenda with the amendment of removing the personnel approval
Until,
until
keep
after.
it on the agenda, but
Right,
until
until
after the
after
presentation.
the presentation.
If you are so inclined, then that's the way to handle it. And then whoever seconded would have to agree to the second.
Second.
Any other discussion? Thank you, Mark. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion passed, and we will come back to that after the presentation. We'll move on to discussion items. First up, on unfinished business, we have the anti-bullying plan. Linda?
He's on here. You know, Josh and I came in and put him on earlier. They're on.
Oh, they're on the rack PC? Yeah, they need to be on this one.
It's wherever that's worth it.
I just put it in to do that.
I was prepared.
Well, I thought I was prepared too, Linda. Look how I'm doing, so.
Josh and I were in here at 4:00 putting these on here.
We shouldn't have board meetings on Mondays. We should have
Maybe that's
meetings
it.
on Monday.
Okay, so is this as good as we're gonna get as far as size? All right, so the only part that I'm bringing back before you is the bullet point for number 8 that you had questions about. And Stephanie, were you able to send them the whole policy again? Because I wasn't sure if Randy had it or not, but you gave us feedback on number 8, which listed out the subgroups that were potentially bullied more than others. So I worked with 2 attorneys at KASB as well as Jennifer Cunningham, and we have reworded it. So it will say, also, one of the feedback was that you didn't want to tolerate any bullying, so we made that the first line. Bullying of any nature or toward any person and or group will not be tolerated. And then development of cultural competence and understanding that certain demographic groups are reported to be disproportionately bullied at a higher rate than their peers, and take off the list of all of the different subgroups.
So I think I was the one that had concerns before, and the issue that I had is the disproportionately and the higher rate, not the groups that are named there. My point was that with the amount of kids that do not report their bullying, we really have no idea if it's disproportionately or at a higher rate. So that was my issue. So I still have concerns with this, but I'm one on a board, so I mean.
Well, and the wording is coming due to federal research. It doesn't necessarily apply to what does our data say. It is the federal research. So according to federal research, there are certain populations that are disproportionately bullied.
I think, but my point is, I think Josh or Jason, I'm sorry, you had said only 10% really report bullying
On average, yes.
on average. And so, you have another 90% that is not reported. So really, whatever data, whether it's federal or it's really not accurate. So that's my concerns with this.
And this part of the plan, so plan. Yes. That part comes from state regulations, so we have to have that in there, correct? Is there?
I think, I mean, I can take it back again, but I think I've wordsmithed it about as much as we can. Like I said, I had 3 attorneys working on this last time, so I'm not sure how else we can wordsmith it and still meet the requirements of the law.
I was asking, I guess my point was wondering about putting something in there in accordance with state law or state regulation. If that makes it any better or not.
I don't want to lose funding over this at all. That's not my, but I don't like making policy based on 10% of data.
Well, the first part of that sentence, bullying of any nature toward any person will not be tolerated, and we do have policy, student code of conduct and so forth that we can address as administrators, as teachers, as personnel. And so in a lot of ways, to your point, but yes, the second sentence may be reported, may not be reported, but I mean, we're not allowing bullying. That's the point. It's an anti-bullying policy. So plan. So we address it and move forward and mitigate what we can, and then do conflict mediation with them. And that would be at administrative and teacher level. So I think it's in a lot of ways that really is with getting our funding with, I mean, once again, it goes to, you have to report it to the teacher, you have to report it to the administrative staff, you have to give us a chance to correct it if that's occurring. So that's true of it. So.
And I would offer, the first sentence sort of takes care of the policy, and then the developing of the cultural competence and understanding that certain demographic groups are reported to be disproportionately bullied is just a statement. I mean, it doesn't bind us in what all we consider in a particular case under this policy, or under this plan, excuse me, this is a plan. So I feel better that we still have not relinquished any consideration of all the local data and information and perspective that we have.
Yes.
I'm comfortable approving this plan as presented and would move to do so if we have a majority.
You won't know if we have a majority until after you put it on the table.
Well, I mean, if people are, we have to decide, I mean, this needs to move forward somehow, and I don't know how else to manipulate it to make. If there's more than 4 or 4 at least that don't feel comfortable, we can go at it again. Just took away the detailed language that was in it before. So it does make it general.
Yeah, I really appreciate the board that we have, the individuals on the board, and we work to address each one's concerns. Cammie, I'm hoping that this helps. And what I read in the language is that it's not binding us. It's a statement that out there is data you already know, or at least we think we know, whether it's 10% or 50% reported, that it's incomplete data. But at least in our plan, I don't think we're bound to rely on Dr. Dominguez's data or whoever's data it is. That was an example. So hopefully that helps.
It doesn't correct the issue that I have with it, but I'm one on the board, so it's not, I totally understand that, but I think it's an inaccurate statement. And I don't like that having a document, but if it's required for funding, I mean, it is what it is. So.
And I would probably ask to remove myself from this vote. I'm coming into it at the end, and it sounds like, and I know there's been a lot of discussions and changes, so I don't feel like I can make an adequate or a proper vote, you know, that I'm educated enough on the discussions and the topics, so.
And I'm comfortable moving forward with it as it's worded, in the sense that I trust the lawyers that we've talked to. But also being aware of the issue at hand, because I have the same concerns that Cammie does. So keeping that in mind as we move forward with that, I think the biggest point is that we don't tolerate bullying no matter what. No matter the student or the staff situation. So.
And I think it's important to, you know, maintain good data in our district. So make sure that we have measures in place that allow us to do that, and that all of our staff are trained, and so that way when they are getting out, they are consistent with that, so we can keep an eye on it and see what that means for our district. We need a second. The motion's been made.
Oh, I'll second. But I was waiting for, I guess then you can have discussion and
Moved and seconded. Any other discussion? Any thoughts, John? So I guess we will go ahead and vote. All in favor, please raise your right hand. Okay. All opposed? Motion passed. Thank you for your discussion.
thank you for your work on
Yes, thank you. And your patience with us. Okay, we'll move on to new business. Looks like we get to listen to Josh talk for a while.
Yeah, a long time. So like Linda, I actually did come prepared, I promise, but so first topic of discussion tonight is we wanted to visit a little bit about the discipline committee or our discipline plan, and we had a committee that has met pretty much all year to kind of look at the discipline plan and kind of go over some things. And so Suzette and I kind of co-chaired the committee together. These are our committee members, and Chris and Melanie and Danica were kind enough to join us tonight. And so a little history about our discipline plan. So our policy was actually enacted in 1998 was when it was adopted by the board. So it's been quite a while since we've looked at the discipline policy. It's really based on 4 levels of discipline, level 1 being the most minor offenses and level 4 being your most significant offenses. And it's really a one-size-fits-all approach for discipline. So it's pre-K through 12, the policy fits all of our grade levels. And I think that was one of the things that we found that we struggled with a lot was the one-size-fits-all model for our kiddos. It's really focused more on punishment a lot of the times rather than on learning from your mistakes. And so a lot of things are punitive, and especially for our younger kiddos who have not been in school and don't really understand the expectations of school. I think that's kind of our job as teachers and administrators to teach those things to our kiddos. And so we kind of put the committee together to kind of look at that.
Can't see that far. Some issues that we found in our current policy, one of them is the state has a star recognition through KSDE, and we were not able to apply for one of the star recognitions because of our current policy. It kind of hindered even our application. We couldn't even get through all the application because once you got to a point, we had to stop. And one of those reasons was that we had pre-K and kindergarten students that could be suspended. We had some students that were suspended in those grades. And part of the star recognition process was that there were no suspensions of pre-K and kindergarten. So that was kind of one of the reasons that we were looking at this. And it also gave us we had to mandatory expel or take to an expulsion hearing for certain situations for even some of our younger students. So we kind of wanted to look at that as well. So that we didn't have to automatically take them to an expulsion. It gave us a few other options before we took them to an expulsion hearing.
So the recommendations that we're gonna have for the board tonight, number 1 is we want to maintain our current discipline policy for grades 3 through 12. We really dug into this year. We really focused on pre-K through 2. And so we've got some recommendations for changes that we're gonna share with you all for pre-K through 2. And then this next year, we would like to look at grades 3 through 12 and what that would look like for 3 through 12. And then also that'll give us an opportunity to take, if the board does choose to adopt our recommendations, that'll give us a chance to implement them next year and kind of use those as kind of our pilot to see what that would look like as we move that into grades 3 through 12 as well. Some of the other things that we want to do is work on creating a resource guide for administrators to include some examples of interventions and strategies that they could use through the 22-23 school year. I feel like a lot of the things that we do is really focused on the punishment piece and not as much on working with our families, teaching our kids proper expectations and working with our kiddos. And so I think that was something that the committee we really talked about that we wanted to try to do.
Some of the changes that we looked at in our policy is the previous one, as Josh alluded to a while ago, had 4 levels. And so our new policy for pre-K through 2 would have 5 levels of discipline. It also focuses on more behavior modification instead of the punitive consequences. And as Josh said, we included some family supports that we can offer for our families that may be struggling. Also, administration has a little more flexibility in some of their consequences while still following the board policy. And as we go through the levels, or if we have the same incident occurs more than once, it gives us some support for our students and building on what's happening for each student.
So an example for level 1, I wish that would blow up a little bit better. I apologize, but at the top, as you can see, at the very top, it talks about that it's level 1, and that is
and we really kind of used a lot of the wording that we had in the old discipline plan and just kind of added to it. And so level 1 would be productive personal environment. These are behaviors that occur in the classroom that affect only the misbehaving student. And so a lot of these, and keep in mind, this looks really different for pre-K through 2, and that's why we really felt like we needed to have a separation for age. So a lot of these at level 1 are really more parenting issues more than they are student behavior issues. So these behaviors would be like truancy, tardiness, dress code violations, things like that. And so the school intervention, so as you follow the flow chart, the first arrow there, if I can come over here, the first arrow here would be the school intervention. So in level 1, there's not a whole lot of school interventions. You'll see them more as we get into the bigger behaviors, but level 1 would be the school interventions. And so the administrators could use one or more of those interventions for the first act. But they have to do at least one, but it's kind of open. And obviously there is only one for this one, and that's conference with the student. And then further interventions, if we still continue to have problems, and then these would be some of the family supports that the administrators could reach out for. And then school interventions as they kind of move forward, plans that you can put in place. And so we tried to make it more than just a cause and effect discipline plan and put some other pieces in place.
And level 2 is more behaviors that are disrupting the learning of other students. It's not physically or mentally harming anybody, just disrupting the learning. So such as disruptive behavior, abusive language, maybe even a toy weapon that's noticeably, distinguishably a toy weapon. And again, they're all kind of laid out the same as Josh just talked about. They have the school interventions under the first part, and there's several different options that administrators could choose from. If it continues, there's further interventions. Again, there's family supports, and then if there's subsequent incidences, there's even more interventions that can be used.
Level 3, you have level 3, it's easier to read on your
I
paper than
know.
it is on the computer. So level 3 is an orderly environment. These are behaviors that occur that are not intended to cause physical or mental harm to another individual, but they do negatively impact an orderly environment. So some of these could be like violation of the acceptable use policy, stealing, extortion, receiving stolen property. I mean, like I said, pre-K through 2, probably not going to see a lot of that, I hope. But those are examples of the behaviors. And then once again, we have the school interventions. And so the interventions could be, as simple as rearranging the classroom seating assignment, ISS maybe, and then further interventions, they could be referred to the student assistance team, things like that. And then we have the community supports, and then further interventions if the behavior continues. And level 4.
Level 4 is behaviors that are intended to cause individual physical or mental harm, or are illegal. And just one thing I want to say about all of these, the lists that we have on here are not inclusive. These are just some guidance on what each level would be. This could be drug possession. Again, we hope we don't have any pre-K through 2nd graders, but any kind of bullying, fighting, assault of somebody else. So we have, again, the school interventions. So it could be, again, rearranging classroom as seating, conferencing with parents, triage of learners, mediation with the learner, maybe even a DCF contact. And then again, we have some further interventions, some community supports for the parents. And then if we have continued incidents, referral to SAT team, update of a safety plan and things like that.
And then level 5 is a little bit smaller, as you can tell, because this is kind of your go directly to jail, do not pass go, and don't collect your $200. So these are, once again, behaviors that are with legal implications that have a significant negative impact on the individuals or the school. So these are all things that we already have in board policy and state regulations. Possession of drugs with the intent to sell or distribute, possession of a weapon at school, possession or use of a firearm, causing serious physical injury, possession of explosives and ammunition, arson. Once again, not an all-inclusive list, but most of these are issues that are not only going to be a significant discipline issue at school, but are also going to have legal implications for the student and as well. And these are mandatory. These would require suspensions at a minimum. So really the family community supports that we had there would be, like to refer to the drug alcohol program, positive parenting, the positive parenting program or triple P, referral to mindful students. And so that one would be the most significant and the most severe. And that's really it. Questions from you all?
Can you explain that Kansas Star recognition through Kansas Department of Education, kind of what that is, or?
Yeah, so the school district can apply for recognition from KSDE to get recognized. We can get recognized for kindergarten readiness, which is where this application fell when we were applying for kindergarten readiness. Social emotional learning is another one. Post-secondary is another one. And so those are all things that we apply. And I think that as we move forward, Glenda, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but that's going to be tied to a lot of those things in our applications, and the process that is going to be tied to accreditation as we move forward too.
And there's
Is that
different
right?
levels that you can achieve.
Yes.
As you're recognized, you could have a bronze, a gold, a silver.
Copper.
And copper.
Copper.
Depending, so it's kind of like a rubric that you apply for and kind of where you're at on each section gives you different points and.
So last year, Suzette and I did the rubric for social emotional, and we earned bronze. We just recently completed it for social emotional with Diane Elliott and Suzette and I. And preliminarily, it looks like we'll be silver for that, but we couldn't even get through the application questions, the qualifier questions to even go into to do the application because we couldn't answer those questions for kindergarten readiness.
In that age group, do we have a lot of suspensions under current policy?
I wouldn't say a lot, but we have a few. A lot of it really is kids that are bringing their Nerf guns to school or their squirt guns to school, things like that. And the way that we've interpreted our policy in the past is that's a facsimile of a weapon. So that's an automatic 10-day suspension and a expulsion hearing. And so we've got kindergartners, first, second graders that we've had to bring to hearings for that. I mean, obviously when it gets to the hearing, it doesn't go anywhere. But in my mind, when I was at Garfield and I was principal at Garfield, I always felt like, especially when you have young parents who've never had children in the schools before, that's my job as the administrators to teach the kids what it's like to be students in school and to teach the parents what their expectations are. And I think we need to use that as more of an educational opportunity for our kids and our families than a gotcha, I guess. And I don't think that was intentional with the policy. Like I said, I just think that 1998 is a long time ago. It's probably time to revisit it,
And we chose the layout of the behavior because as we work on the next grade levels, that's going to stay the same, but our reaction to it is going to be different.
Yeah.
Because as the children get older, hopefully we've done our job at K2. But by the time they're getting to third, fourth, fifth grade, I mean, the consequences are going to look differently. But that's the reason why you saw the severity of the behavior, because really is a kindergartner going to bring drugs for distribution? Probably not, hopefully not. I would hope not,
But once again, even if that happens, in my mind, is that the kindergartner's fault or is that a parenting issue?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, and I think we need to use those opportunities to work with our families.
Well, I guess that leads me to a question that I have in terms of the referral to community supports, which I think is excellent, but a lot of times we know just a referrals doesn't mean completion of a program or attendance at a program. So is that, it's not that I think that's a great thing to do is to give parents resources, but being that so many, like you have said a couple of times, of these kind of issues are more maybe responsibility of the parent at that point, is a referral enough? When they get down to the harm.
Yeah, can I speak from a personal? So I do the behavior program here for you guys. It's a K-4 program. And you know, that might be the perspective we have, but anytime that my principal, Michelle Kent, and I have gone into a meeting with a parent and explained to them, look, this is where the significance of these behaviors are. It's now time that we start taking care of these behaviors, because now your child's been in 1, 2, or 3 schools, you know, and this is it. They actually seem to take us pretty well. So I think being able to provide them with some resources, I think sometimes we do jump to that conclusion because we do have an education behind us, that we forget that they may not see any difference because they only see their baby. I don't know, but I mean, they've been very open to us.
And open to accepting that the resources or getting that
Mhm.
support.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things too, Dana, is in a lot of these, especially when you get to the more significant behaviors, one of the things is a referral to DCF. I mean, we don't ever want to do that, but obviously if you've got a kindergartner that's bringing drugs to school or things like that, that's probably a DCF referral, and law enforcement does need to be contacted about that, and social services too.
And I think that'll help us with our DCF, because if this goes out to the parents and it says, look, this is our choices, we don't have a choice yet to make that DCF call, because I had to be put in that position this year. And I had to tell the parents, this was not a choice on our part. The behavior was a significant level enough that we had to make the DCF call. And once we said it that way, then the parents calmed down, they understood, and then it went back onto the child's shoulder. And that really helped me out as an educator. Yeah.
Well, about holding the parents' accountability, I like adding that step to that. I think that's a good step forward.
Well, and I think a lot of our parents want to do well. They're doing the best they have, the best they can with what they have. And if we can give them some resources and some things to help them, I think that's just gonna make.
Even before a referral.
Right,
Because
absolutely.
obviously The triple P positive parenting, I've attended that myself with
Yeah.
preschool age children,
Yeah,
and I
great
mean, we got
program.
great parent attendance, and I mean, I won't say great, but you do have parents that are interested in getting some of those parenting tips. So, I mean, yes, it's great when they reach this, but even just the access to notes on the front end.
And I know this year, a lot of our elementary schools, I don't know if it went beyond that, did, do you remember what that was called? The parenting classes I can't think of what it was actually called, but we did the parenting classes and we actually had fairly good attendance. I would say we had probably 60% of our parents there, but some of them had 100% attendance. So I know Alta Brown did 2 different sessions of 8-week-long courses, and they had 100% attendance. I was just talking with one of my colleagues,
Are we getting that again this year, provided?
I believe so, because we still have the ESSERS money. Yeah, okay, so yes, it's through the ESSERS funds. And so, yeah, and I liked it. I thought it was actually very good. I felt like the parent discussions were good. I think sometimes, you just get into your rut and your routine and you forget how critical some of these other skills are that kids really desperately need.
We talked a lot a number of years ago about developing a rubric for kindergarten readiness and then on up the line. Has that rubric helped us in this discipline thing, in that communication with parents? Have we basically made the policy obsolete?
I think the rubric has helped. I definitely think it's really encouraged teachers and parents to talk more about where your kid's at, what they're doing, what they should, what's appropriate for that age level. I think that piece has been really good. I think
Was it a social, part of that was social emotional,
Sure.
was the child really ready for that environment?
Yeah, the social piece to that was a lot of it. I think that there's a lot to that. But I think a lot of the things that we see are, a lot of the kiddos that that we see where they've gone to a suspension or an expulsion hearing. And Glenda can speak to this more than I can, but they're good kids who you really don't have any concerns with. And maybe they went to a birthday party over the weekend and the squirt gun was a prize that they got and they brought it to school and there it was, so there are a lot of the times, I mean, don't you agree, Glenda? There are kids that are not on our radar, and this just kind of happens. And I think that's created, I think, some frustration for parents too. And I understand that too.
And so do you think maybe, in some of the comments I made earlier, maybe revisit third and fourth or whatever's appropriate locks there for appropriate elbow room there as well?
Yeah. So I think our plan, we've kind of talked, we really haven't nailed down. I think we were thinking like 3 through 6. We'll have a plan for 3 through 6 and then 6 through 12 is kind of where we're thinking right now.
7, 12.
Or yeah, I'm sorry, 3 through 6 and 7 through 12.
That would greatly help us with our applications here to be recognized for the good work that we're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
The other thing is special ed students. How have we addressed that? Well, obviously with the elbow room you're talking about here, you can easily address SPED students.
So kiddos that are on IEPs, federal law doesn't allow us to suspend them for more than 10 days unless we have a manifestation determination hearing for them. So basically what that is we have a meeting and we look at the kiddo's IEP and is the behavior that they exhibited that got them into this disciplinary trouble, is that directly related to their disability? And if it is a manifestation of their disability, then we can't move forward with a long-term suspension for them. If it isn't, then you can go ahead and you can move forward. And so we've done that. That's been common practice, and we have a lot of manifestation hearings that we do on a regular basis. I mean, I would say easily over 100 that we do a year.
Okay.
So, and not always kids that are going to expulsion. One of the things that it says when you do manifestations is, yes, if it's a long-term, like we're looking at expulsion for the rest of the year or whatever that looks like. But also if you're seeing a pattern of short-term behaviors and they're the same behaviors that are causing these short-term suspensions, then if you're seeing a pattern of removal, then you need to have a manifestation then. And then through that, if you determine that it is a manifestation, then you do it like a functional behavior assessment, create a behavior plan, and do other things like that to support the kiddos.
I appreciate that explanation because in your next presentation, that's part of my concern here when we get into least restrictive environments actually becoming restrictive environments in which you have a manifestation of behavioral problems because it's way over their head.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your comments.
Yes, ma'am.
On this, and you've seen several different districts, it's really great, but is there things that you've seen?
Well, I mean, once again, we just need to let it play out. So I really do think we're on to it and using some reason with that. If it is a water pistol, we have to use some common sense with that versus the rigidity sometimes is, I need to use common sense versus the rigidity. Does he have access? Does he have this, that? It's in this case, a water pistol. Then say, just don't bring that anymore and then come to an expulsion. But if that rigidity is there in our training, in our principles, then now they're going to bring it to the ESC and then we're going to have to address it here, so that's, sometimes we have to give them frankly common sense, just let them use their common sense and not take it to that extent. But if that is policy and we're that rigid about it, it makes it hard. It makes it hard to just use common sense. So,
One of the things that I like about this is I feel like it allows our principals to be a little bit more proactive with the kids and with the families. I feel like it gives them a little bit more flexibility. It's not like I said, it's not a one size fits all. And so depending on who the kiddo is and what the incident is, you can handle that.
I feel like it gives us the ability to be more restorative in our practices than punitive.
I know we had a principal last year that was very concerned about out of school, like that kind of punitive action for these little tiny ones. So or younger ones, maybe
Well, I've oftentimes laughed with Suzette because I said, yeah, there could be one day that I would have no kids in my classroom, all for the discipline, and I'm not kidding.
Thank you. Oh, go ahead, Jen.
Yeah, so I have some discussion. I agree 100% that parents involved in our kids' education is the absolute key to success and behavior and educational success. And I do like this approach of common sense and using that. My only concern is if this works for 99.9% of the kids and we have one student that has a disciplinary issue and we went through all the channels and we've done, what avenue do we have with that student?
If you saw down below, it does,
Yeah.
the consequences get more severe, and it does say on each one that we still ultimately have the choice to
Yeah.
go ahead and out of school suspend the
Yeah,
child.
they can be short-term suspended, but it's not
But it's not a direct go-to.
the direct go-to anymore.
But we did put that in every
Yeah.
single one of the levels,
Okay.
just for our protection. Yep.
How does that factor into the STAR? That going to that route?
That's only preschool and kindergarten. Those are the only two grades that we really need to, and hopefully if we're catching them in preschool and kindergarten and we're doing our job. I saw a very significant change with a little kindergartner that came from early childhood to me this last year. He made tremendous growth. I mean, he went from maybe staying in the classroom 10 minutes to he was doing 215 with me with support. I mean, he had para support and he needed it, but to be able to make that much growth in an academic year, that means that we're doing something in the right direction. And we really looked at his behavior very similarly to what was put up here. And one of the things was he could not hurt another child. If he hurt another child, he was put into in-school suspension. And I know this might sound significant to you guys, but we also put him on a plan that he could not hit his para more than 3 times a day. And yeah, but it worked and he had X's. And if he got to the 3rd box, he knew, oh, man, and he would tell us, guess I gotta go to ISS. And I said, yeah, I said, what choices? I hit, all right. But by the end of the year, it was very little that we were seeing that. And I think that's that was where we had a little bit more wiggle room so that we could teach him, because otherwise he'd have been out of school almost every day. Within the first 10 minutes he was in school.
So this is a change to your plan. This is not a change to board policy.
No, this would be a change to the board policy. Yeah, this would require action from you all.
And are you seeking that tonight or are we doing a one meeting?
I'm fine with waiting till next if you guys need to think about that. And I can get you copies of this. I'll get that so you can see it closer and be able to look at it because it's pretty small up there too. So I apologize. I thought it was going to look bigger on the bigger monitors than it did. So
I'd have to say I applaud your work. Thank you, and I'm excited for the strategy.
And we pulled the elementary student handbook off the consent agenda for today. It will be on the next one as well as this, because it will have to go in that elementary handbook. So we knew we couldn't approve the elementary handbook tonight and then not approve that till next time. So they'll both be on the consent agenda at the next meeting.
Thank you for that.
Thank you, guys. Anything else? On to the SPED restructure.
everybody that was part of that committee, if you'll come up. So really what brought this all about was, I mean, no shock to anybody on the board, but we're really struggling hiring teachers right now. So self-contained, in our self-contained classrooms, we have 3 self-contained classrooms at Alta Romana. Currently, we have 3 self-contained classrooms at Edith Sharman, and then we have 1 at Florence Wilson. So we have 7 self-contained classrooms in the district at the elementary level. That's not counting our RISE rooms and some of our other classrooms. These are our academic self-contained classrooms. Of those 7 classrooms going into the next year, I have 2 teachers, one of whom Linda, is our only returning self-contained teacher. Maria Bernacki is coming back to, or is coming in, and she'll be on a waiver for us next year. She taught third grade at Alta Brown and agreed to go into self-contained. So we have 2 teachers, which leaves us 5 classrooms. And we're talking about our most significant kiddos with the highest needs, needing the most support that they can get. And so that was a big concern of mine. And so I asked these ladies and gentlemen to be a part of it. And so we put a kind of a committee together, and we needed to move fast because it's summertime and school's going to be here before you know it. And so this is the committee that we put together to kind of start talking about what that looked like. And really, in the beginning, it was just kind of brainstorming what are ideas, and we kind of threw some ideas out there. And the idea that we're going to share with you, I think, was kind of the best idea that we had under the circumstances. This is kind of the best of not really good, any of them are not really great choices, but this was the best of the choices that we had, that we came up with. So we had teachers, we had administrators, and then obviously all of our SPED administrators were in there as well. So I've already kind of shared that a little bit with you, but self-contained classrooms, so our current status right now for the 22-23 school year, those 7 classrooms would have about 73 students enrolled in them. And we have 2 teachers hired for those 73 kiddos. And so my concern is we need to have our best in front of those kiddos. And I'm not knocking, we've got some great subs, we've got some great long-term subs, but if we can get our kids in front of veteran teachers, experienced teachers as much as we can, that's gonna probably give us better benefits. So just like I shared, many of the students with the most significant needs are going to be spending most of their day in front of a classroom that's not certified. And that's obviously going to have some negative impacts on their academic and their social outcomes. So really the task of the committee was one, to brainstorm ideas to best meet the needs of the students with limited teaching positions, and then make a recommendation for us to move forward. So the recommendations that we came up with would be to move the majority of our kiddos back to their home buildings with supports. And then we would like to keep 2 classrooms that were going to be self-contained. And both of those classrooms will stay at Alta Brown. And so those 2 classrooms are going to be for our most significant kiddos. Those are going to be, and then it's going to be more of a life skills focus. So those are kiddos that are more than likely going to be taking the alternative assessment, the DLM, instead of the state assessment. These are kiddos who's got a general IQ of below 50 or below in that area. And so they're going to require not only alternative assessments, but alternative curriculum, significant modifications to what we're doing, and a lot of accommodations to be successful. And so keeping 2 teachers back for those kiddos. So that would give us 7 teaching positions basically that we're looking at, that we would have in play, and about 30 classified positions, 30 para positions that we would have. So of those 7 teaching positions and 30 para positions, 2 of those would stay at Alta Brown in the self-contained setting. 2 teachers and 6 paras would stay back to support the 2 self-contained classrooms that we would keep.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Josh, but 30 para positions, but you only have 6 to work with, right? You only have,
Yeah,
it says right there, you only have 6 paras right now, right?
No, that's 6 that we're going to keep at Alta Brown.
Oh,
Yeah.
I beg your pardon.
Yeah. So we'll have 2 teaching positions that will stay at Alta Brown, and 6 paras. So each of the self-contained classrooms will have 1 teacher and 3 paraprofessionals that will stay in those self-contained
I wonder
classrooms.
how we got so short on paras.
Yeah, no. The other positions, all of the other positions will go back to the buildings to support the buildings. And so through kind of crunching numbers and looking at student needs, we kind of identified who those kiddos would be. I looked at caseloads and tried to balance caseloads and have caseloads manageable. And so the pairs, basically all of the pairs are going to be spread out amongst the elementary schools, the remaining pairs minus those 6. We'll go to the elementary schools, and they'll all be utilized either in a more of a we don't really call them one-on-ones anymore. We call it adequate adult support, because as the child gets older and they don't need that one-on-one support all the time, maybe they only need it 80% of the day or 70% of the day. If they have a one-on-one in their IEP, they have to be with them all the time. And so that allows us a little bit more flexibility. But for all intents and purposes, especially moving these kiddos back to their buildings, they're going to need a lot more support. So those pairs would go back to the buildings. Right now, what I have on the consent agenda that we took off would be one teaching position that would move, would be reallocated, that would go to Gertrude Walker, to support Gertrude Walker, because they're going to see one of the highest numbers. The other one, we would have a position that would stay at Edith Sharman, because Edith Sharman, a lot of those kiddos that were in the self-contained classrooms are actually, that's their boundary school. So they would be, we would keep a teacher there. And then I'd have another position that we would split between Jenny Wilson and Buffalo Jones. And then that would allow us to put 3 of those positions on hold for right now, and kind of see what things look like when the school year starts, and see where we need to put those positions. And allow us to be a little bit more flexible with what that need looks like. Whoops, I hit the wrong button, went the wrong way. One of the things that I would say is really what I envision this looking like is, instead of the kiddos' homeroom classroom being the self-contained kindergarten classroom, they're going to be a homeroom student in Miss Goldby's kindergarten classroom. And all of the minutes that they would get for special education through the IEP in the self-contained classroom, they would then be able to get in the resource room. So we're still going to be able to provide that support to them. We're still going to be able to get their services for them. It's just going to be flipping the model, basically. We're not going to take any of their sped minutes away from them.
Can I ask a quick question there?
Sure.
Too? The resource room, I mean, normally a resource staffer is for all kids that need help, right?
It would be all kids on IEPs.
Yeah. On IEPs?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So if they're the kids that just need help, they're going to go to the intervention room. They're going to get interventions. Yeah. Resource would be special education.
So those sort of become your sped teacher, except for the times that student is in the regular classroom.
Correct.
Okay, and you guys are all on top of this, I'm just a learner, but some of those kids spend a lot of time outside the classroom. So they're just gonna spend a lot of time out of the classroom with the resource person.
That's very possible, yeah.
As far as.
It could be
minutes or.
So.
Minutes on the IEP.
Yeah, minutes on the IEP. So typically, in the old days, when we talk about a kid, when we think the kid probably needs to be self-contained because they're really struggling, we tell them they need to max out their IEP. And so we tell them that they need to be getting at least 180 minutes of special education services before we even consider that. So they're going to be going back to their home building with probably oftentimes more than 180 minutes on the IEP. And so that's why it's going to be crucial to have those paras and those teachers there to support the buildings. But I will say, if you look at it, a lot of the buildings, as we move these kiddos back to their home buildings, Edith Sharman, I think, is going to be, I can't remember the number. Linda, do you remember? I think it was 8 or 9 that you guys were going to get that were going to stay at Edith Sharman. And so that was one of the higher numbers. David, you had 7.
Yeah.
And so those were the 2 highest buildings that have self-contained kiddos that are going to be returned into their home schools. Example of VO, they've got 3 that they're going to get that are going to go back. So while this sounds really big, I think having the staff and having the people there, I think it's doable. Do I think we're going to have growing pains? Absolutely. And do I think we're going to have a lot of support and have some things in place? Yes. And I don't
So
know.
many of these kids are not normal in the sense that they don't have the social emotional adjustment of most of the rest of the kids in the classroom. And we all know that the more transitions we give to kids, the tougher, the more they struggle.
Sure.
And so that's sort of the bad aspect of this.
Right.
It's a preponderance of good and evil, and you're trying to, like you said earlier.
Completely agree. There is no good choice here. I mean, if you'd asked me 3 months ago, would I be planning on doing this summer? My answer would have been absolutely not.
May I add to that too, just a little bit, because I taught self-contained as well. So the opposite of that too is a lot of these kids, I think, are going to benefit a lot from it. I know myself, I think I transitioned 2 or 3 more to the general education setting once we got them where they needed to be. And so there is also, I think, a group of students, in my mind, I think more that are gonna excel because of the move. They're still gonna need a lot of supports though, but there's that aspect of it too.
Right, and I would piggyback that when they're with the master teacher and the supports, and that's probably what the committee weighed, that are gonna be with the master teacher with support, and then some of that growth is gonna occur, just like Mr. Deloche just elaborated on. So I'm sure that was part of the thought process.
You know, I think a couple of things that I would say, you know, there's a lot of research on this, and some of the things that they talk about, you know, is from the kiddos is higher academic performance, a higher likelihood of employment, higher participation rates in post-secondary education, greater integration into the community for a lot of our kiddos. I think the social aspect of this is going to be really good for our kiddos because they're going to actually be a part of the kindergarten classroom. They're going to be a part, and they're going to have those typically developing peers to learn the proper social cues from.
Some of that is true, but some of it goes opposite, right?
Sure.
And that if a child that knows they're not like the other kids, you know, that's now a restrictive environment. And then the other kids can be brutal, particularly at the younger ages, against those different kids. And maybe there's a teaching opportunity there with the rest of the kids for sure.
That was what I was going to say. I think that's.
But it's, and so maybe the parents will be there and the guidance. But it's a fearful thing it's a lofty goal for these individual kids, but now there's a burden on the individual classroom teacher. You've got to now have a wider swath of individual learning strategies. And maybe the parent will have enough paras to help there. What I was wondering was, on coming back, certainly we don't want self-contained classrooms that just become child sitting rooms, for lack of a better term. You know, but at the same time, there are some fabulous people working with kids, and then some of those same resources you identified in the individual schools could still come in and scaffold that kind of environment without adding the transitions, different kids, different school, different learning environment, although in some cases better. And so, good thing you're updating the behavior policy here, because I think you're going to run into, the math calculates out you're going to have behavior.
Yeah.
Because we are abandoning what we have learned for many, many years about why we created these special classrooms to begin with.
Right.
But that's just sort of general comments.
Well, and I will say that, I will say too, I think, well, like I said, this wasn't something that I was planning on doing this summer. Not something that I was really, that I had on my radar. You know, in Southwest Kansas, we're one of the only districts that still have programs like this. I mean, if you look at a lot of our surrounding neighbors, the kiddos go and they're in their classrooms, and that's where they are.
I just don't understand why the other districts are doing it wrong.
Yeah.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no.
But the point is,
and I think that's one of the things that I think that's critical too, Mark, is that we're a lot of the kiddos that are still going to be going, that we're having go back to their community schools, they're going to be there. These are kiddos that we're expected to still take the state assessment. And so I think it's critical that we have that curriculum in front of them, and we're exposing them to that, giving them those opportunities where they may not always get those in the self-contained classroom. So I think that'll be an added benefit for sure.
and I apologize to you and the team for jumping in with questions so rigorously, because I don't think you're even done with your presentation.
Just about. I think I have 1 or 2 more slides. So just going back to a lot of what you've talked about, I think obviously I know that we're going to have a lot of support here. And these are some ideas that I have, but this is obviously not an all-inclusive list, and I think a lot of this is gonna depend on time and as we identify more needs as we move through, but you know, we'll have some breakout trainings that we can do for gen ed and special ed staff. When we do our back to school and services, we'll have 2 days in September where secondary is all doing AVID training, but elementary is not. So that'll give me 2 days to really focus on some things in September. And then we've talked about maybe just doing like little short videos or things like that that we could share weekly at PLCs, at faculty meetings, things like that, that are not so much you're going to learn a lot, but just kind of give you little ideas, little tidbits to kind of use along the way. Topics that I've talked about that we are going to need a lot of support with is classroom management. Obviously, going to need that. Differentiated instruction, because teachers are going to really have to differentiate more than they've done in the past. Developing and implementing a behavior plan, and I think accommodations. You know, we talk about accommodations and accommodating our kiddos when they're in the classrooms and what those look like, but I think we really need to dig into that and what does that mean and how do we do that and what does that look like? I think we need to spend a lot of time on accommodations and how to write good accommodations for our kids and being more intentional with what those accommodations are and being more intentional in individualizing those for the kiddos versus, you know, I think a lot of the times we just have, these are the ones that we are bread and butter that we use. We really need to think more intentionally on what that's going to look like.
And sometimes those accommodations will benefit the rest of the classroom.
Absolutely. You bet. Visual supports. I mean, a lot of our kids are going to need visual supports. Visual schedules. I think those are good for, I mean, those are going to be good for all kids. It's really going to help our kids, but they'll help all kids. I agree, Jennifer. So now, Mr. Rubin, I'm done.
Okay.
So
I didn't hear you mention, I heard though that maybe you were going to create a classroom that was just of 19 kids that are all on the spectrum.
we had talked about that, if we got a teacher for that, but we have not gotten a teacher for
I
that. So,
didn't hear that you had a
yeah,
teacher.
so that's something that I would like to do down the road. If we can identify a teacher for that, I would love to have an autism room. Yes, sir.
Those are, well, that's an example of a whole suite of amazing individuals.
Yeah.
But at different places.
And Tammy actually thought we had a teacher. She had been talking to a gal but she never applied. And she had a lot of training and a lot of background in that. So that was our hope that we were going to have an autism room, but
But if there's 19, wouldn't that be 2 classrooms or was that going to be one big classroom?
and I don't know that would have been 19. Was it that many that we looked at when we were doing that? You guys remember, was it that many? Yeah. So, yeah, it may not have
Not
been.
all of them needed that type of classroom.
Yeah.
Some of them can function just fine in the general education classroom.
We have kiddos now that are in the regular classrooms that are autistic and are doing just fine. I mean, they struggle a little bit socially, or communication wise, but they're fine. And they do fine with a little structure and a little routine. It depends on where they're at on that spectrum because the autism spectrum is huge. So.
Like you got some questions over here. Go ahead.
Yep. One of the things that is coming to my mind is that in those 7 classrooms, did we have 7 instructors, SPED instructors? And if we only have 2 left, that means we've lost, those 5. Did they leave SPED? Did they leave our district completely? Because what I'm concerned about is what's happening with our
Sure.
teachers. And I understand from this committee that you're seeing that we'll need more support with this particular model or with these changes. But my concern is what's happening in this world, either in our district, or is this a national thing? We're seeing a lot of exodus of teachers.
I can tell you, Mr. Deloach left us to become a principal, so that's one. Caitlin Sotelo was the kindergarten teacher in his building. She took the teaching position at the TEP, so she didn't leave SPED. She just went to a different position. So she filled a vacancy that we had at the TEP. She's one. Annie Rutia was our other self-contained teacher at Alta Brown, and Anna retired this year. So that's where those 3 were. Jamie Schnathman was my self-contained teacher at Florence Wilson, and she was a long-term sub, and she got her teaching degree. And so she took a position at Jenny Barker because she wasn't certified to teach SPED. And so we lost her to Jenny Barker. Linda's still with us. She's one that's held on for us. Kim Morgan moved to Missouri to be with family, and then Katie Goody went back to gen ed. Just
We're
decided.
just in the general teaching field, not getting enough teachers in this sped.
Yes, absolutely. Special ed has always been a tough to fill position, and it's even 10 times harder than it was before. And one of the things that I think we struggle with is if you go down, and Dr. Dominguez can speak to this, you go to, and you're competing with districts in Texas, they'll give a $4,000 signing bonus for sped teachers. And things like that, because they're hard to fill positions. And so,
Look at the openings of general education teachers, and sped is so much more significant. It's extra training and everything like that. So it does take a whole lot more, a lot of extra paperwork.
A lot of extra paperwork,
And
a lot of extra hours, lots of.
and I think the
biggest
district,
complaint about special ed is the amount of hours it takes for some teachers to do the IEPs, conduct the meetings. And then sometimes we get credit for that as far as like release days, when we used to have release days, and sometimes you couldn't because of the fact we got the extra pay that we get for those, for doing sped.
and we do offer a supplemental for our special education teachers. And I think it's nice that the district, I think it's something that the district does to try to recognize the extra work that they do, but it's a tough field. And it's just getting harder.
So just following up with what you said, the amount of paperwork. So is that gonna go on the general education teacher too? They'll be responsible for that?
No. So the resource teachers, so basically those kiddos are gonna go, so like Linda is leaving self-contained special ed to be a resource teacher in special ed. So her and Bethany are both gonna be the two special education teachers at Edith Sharman. And so they'll take all of the kiddos that are on IEPs at Edith Sharman, and they'll split those caseloads in half. So Bethany will be responsible for half, and Linda will be responsible for the other half, and they'll do all the IEP paperwork and things like that.
Sorry, that may be a very, maybe obvious question, but I just, there is definitely concern for teachers having more in the
Sure.
differentiation and all that type of thing. So I want to try and get a visual image of what that might look like. And I hope that you guys will come back and present after this year or the coming year. And, we need to hear about some of those growing pains and how this supports worked or did not work, and what we need to do. Because it seems like the population is also getting bigger. I remember sitting in on one of the committees, I think when they did presentations for different things, and SPED was one of them, and they were talking about the increasing number of students that you're also working with. So it's a big concern.
Well, and I think two things. I think COVID, obviously, has really increased the amount of referrals that we're seeing now, because kids didn't get instruction for daily, regular, typical instruction for, a year and a half. And so that's had an impact. And so a lot of the times we're seeing referrals where it's probably not necessarily a special education issue. It's just, there's a learning gap there and we need to fill that learning gap. But we are seeing an increase in evaluations. But we're also seeing a significant increase in our kiddos that are really are significant needs. We have a RISE room, which Melanie, I never remember. RISE stands for
Reaching independence through structured environments.
Reaching independence through structured environments. And so we've had a RISE room at Garfield, and then we've got a RISE room at VO, and then one at Charles Stone's, and then at the high school. And so those kids transition through that. Melanie for years was our RISE teacher at Garfield. And then when she left, then Paxton Reinbold was our RISE teacher at Garfield. Well, last year we opened a second RISE room at Garfield. This year we had plans to open a third RISE room at Garfield because the numbers were there, but we don't have the teaching staff to do it. So we're going to do our best with two. But the kiddos that are coming in with those significant needs, lack of communication, those things, that's increasing, and we're seeing that.
Can I ask, how are you gonna do your best?
How are we going to do?
If you have that many students, that's the challenge that educators, we're an excellent district and we have excellent staff. And one of the reasons, by the way, other districts aren't doing this because they farm out their SPED program to co-ops or whatever that's called. And we don't. we own it pre-K all the way up. And I think we've done an exceptional job. We certainly have exceptional staff. Those that still remain or don't abandon ship to be a principal or something. Not abandon ship, not at all. So when you say we have enough for 3, but we're gonna make do, does that mean you're gonna have 2 big classes? Or are you going to have 3, but one of them's just not gonna be a sped or it's gonna be a long-term setup
We're
or
just going to
something?
have 2 rise rooms at Garfield. We were gonna open the 3rd and we would have some wiggle room so that each classroom wouldn't start full being about 8 students per classroom. So at this time, we're gonna go back down to 2. That leaves a few open spots in the afternoon, but not very many in the morning. Our hope is that some of these kids, the teachers that we're teaching are no longer in those positions next year. And they said that some of these kids would be able to transition out to one of our other early childhood rooms within a few months. So our hope is that we'll be able to transition some out. That way we have space for new students. And then we're also going to be adding an additional para in each classroom. So they'll run with 6 paras and 1 classroom teacher. And then the speech pathologist comes in to do a rotation with the students twice a week in each room.
I think you set the bar high, the expectations, they're gonna learn, they're gonna advance, and they're gonna move out. And that's great.
So hopefully it all goes as planned, but of course you never know what's gonna come through our doors next school year. So we just, try and plan as best we can and do a lot of teaching with our other teachers as well on how to help those students with some behaviors.
Like one of the things I think the district has done excellent is the, I don't know what's it called now, but it used to be TKI.
TKI now, transitional kindergarten, now it's progressive kindergarten.
Progressive kindergarten. And the concept there again is bar high. These kids need additional help. If you put them in kindergarten, they won't survive, or they'll struggle. And so better to put them in sort of a combination, get some special attention. But some of these kids that maybe would go to self-contained now will go into TKI.
A few of them.
And presumably those are ones that we set the bar high and they ought to excel. That's the hope.
And Melanie helped a lot with that because she knew a lot of the kids. And then I know Amanda had talked to your Melanie about kiddos too, so we kind of identified kiddos that we thought would be good candidates for that program. So yeah, that's our hope.
I think if I could interrupt for just to make sure that we hone ourselves back to the legality of it. The IEP team will make those decisions. Like Josh doesn't get to make unilateral decisions on where students are placed. The board doesn't get to make unilateral decisions on what rooms we have or don't. We have to go through the process of the IE team placing that. So we have to have all the options available. I think what Josh is saying is through some of this process, we can see where we could restaff some students and have some of those placement meetings, because they'll have to go back and those students that are changing their placements will have to have another IEP meetings, and those IEP teams will determine, where that placement happens, what minutes that they have. And so what we're thinking is in this reorganization is having that opportunity that we think we have the choices to move students out of self-contained into interrelated rooms or into the general ed. Those IEP teams will make those decisions. I think what he's going to present tonight with the consent agenda in the HR positions is this is where we may need to reallocate those positions, but those IEP teams will make those decisions. We don't really get to make those decisions on a basis or a unilateral basis. They have to make them individually with their teams. And so we don't, we can talk hypothetically about where we may need staff, but until those placements are done, we don't really have that opportunity to cement it for sure.
So all new IEPs.
Well,
they're annuals, they're reviews that.
So I will say the kiddos that we're moving to PKI, sorry, Amanda, PKI, those we have to have IEP meetings because that's a change of placement. So we have to do that before school starts. They can't go in there. The kiddos that are going to stay at Alta Brown and be in the self-contained room still, it's the same program. Everything's going to be the same for them. I'm still trying to get an answer from legal counsel at ATE, but in my mind, when we enter our minutes on and we report those things to the state and to the feds, the resource minutes and the self-contained minutes are the same exact code. So if they're going to the resource room or they're going to the self-contained room, it's the same code. So I think legally, we don't have to have those IEP meetings before school starts. But we need to probably have those meetings within the first month or two of school starting. Because I'm thinking if we have to do 75 or whatever that number was, IEPs before school started, that's not gonna make me very popular with my teachers. So if we can avoid that and have as few meetings before school starts as possible, we will. I mean, I've already told like Amanda that I would pay her to come in for a couple days before school and we'll have those meetings to move those kiddos over. But yeah.
Students, then staff, and you've given a lot of thought to both.
Yeah.
And we'll see. It sounds like ready to make some adaptive adjustments too.
Yeah. I mean, I think we're just gonna have to be able to identify where the needs are and stick our fingers in the holes as much as we can, Mark.
I just have two quick questions.
Yes,
What's the para to student ratio? Is there
Like,
typical para to?
it really depends. It depends on the need of the students. So some of our students will have, like I said, they'll have one-on-ones for pretty much most of the day. Self-contained rooms, you know, we really like to have those 4-to-1, 5-to-1 at most. Mel, what did you have in your RISE room? Do you remember?
We have 7 staff and 8 students.
Yeah, so it's more one-on-one, but those are your more intensive kids. If you go to like our day school, it's 1-to-1. But self-contained is 3, 4, around there.
So you had 30 paras up there, right? Is that mostly filled or is that still a lot of openings there?
It's probably about 50%. So basically, Julie's gonna keep 6 paras at Alta Brown. She had 6 paras on staff that she could keep. All of her open positions moved out. Jill had open positions that she kept. When we move people over there, she'll have one position that she moved out, that we had to force out. That's actually gonna go to Buffalo Jones to fill a position. That was on the consent agenda, and Edith Sharman, I think, kept all but 1 too, if I'm not mistaken. So there really wasn't a lot of, because I moved open positions and let the people stay in the buildings they were in. So, yeah.
This might be a silly question, but the ESSERS funds that we approved for the therapeutics and stuff, I know that was by building. So since we're moving kids around, does that impact that any at all, or how does that therapeutic stuff?
Are you talking the sensory materials? Is that what you're talking about? No, that'll be okay, because honestly, I think this will actually be a huge help with what we're doing, because that'll give us some extra resources for the schools that are gonna have kiddos that they may not have had before, so that'll be a significant help to them. Anything else?
So you talked about the students, one student or one school getting like 8 or 9 and another one getting 7. Are those all in the same grade or they're split?
They're gonna be K4. They're split K4.
Maybe
So it
one
might be
classroom?
done in a classroom.
Yeah, yeah.
Like
So
we have 2.
Suzette got 2 in her
So I'll
building.
have one in one grade and one in another grade.
I appreciate David's comments, because as I was reading through this and looking at it, I think there is gonna be some benefits to some of these kids. Obviously, not every one of them. It's a tough situation. I appreciate you tackling it head on, and your whole team. I know you love the students and you want to do what's best for the students. And appreciate you working through the best we can in this situation.
Nice to get a presentation here in a year, so
Yeah.
just wave the flags of success that I know is gonna happen there. So,
Board members are always welcome in school, so go visit.
Yeah, absolutely.
Come on
We
out.
love to have visitors. So I'll
At
have
least
Glenda,
that's my impression.
I'll have Glenda put me on the agenda for June,
Anytime.
Mark.
Okay.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Do we want to go ahead and move forward with that motion then? Are you comfortable with
Yeah,
that?
with that presentation, first of all, congratulate them all, a lot of work there and a lot of work to do yet. So many individual students there, as a district team. That's our focus, is the student and the staff to help the students so that they get that quality education that they need. I guess, Madam President, I would move that we there's nothing to approve here, so I would move that we approve the personnel items that we removed from the consent agenda at this time.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion passed. And it's Glenda's turn.
Thank you guys.
We're going to do policy recommendations to you tonight. The first one is IKB. It is controversial issues. The current policy is what you see on this slide. Controversial issues cannot always be ignored by educators. When such issues arise, they must be treated fairly with impartiality. Then that was the first one, and then along with that, they added a revised controversial issues that actually listed out rights of the students and where these subjects might come up. So topics is religions, ideas, words, movies, still pictures, political policies, theories, platforms, etc. The first paragraph is a listing. And then it goes through the rights of the students on that they can study political controversial issues at their level. Anything that they should currently have an opinion on or could have an opinion on. So this is our current policy. These two, IKB and IKBR. In June, KASB came out with an updated version, and that is what you see here. So when a controversial subject arises in the classroom, teachers may use the opportunity to teach about the controversy. Teachers shall ensure that all positions are concerning any controversial subjects are presented and the students have the opportunity to freely discuss the topic. So they've taken out the list and said that you have to show both sides. It's not that the teacher gets to decide this is what you're going to learn about. All sides of the topic have to be discussed. So that is the new recommendation from KASB.
So is that slide all that there is of the policy?
That is all that they are recommending of the policy. They've taken out the other two and brought it back down to this one.
Okay. I guess my question is, they took out the part where it says teachers may not use student or social districts for advancement of their own views on social issues. Is that covered within that new wording somehow?
No, the new wording says that they have to teach all sides of it. That they must.
It's implied that they
It's
can't.
not-
Well, that's what I just wanted to make.
I mean, that's how I read it. but
Yeah,
I
they
don't-
have to ensure all positions concerning the subjects are presented. So this is a first read, so I'm open for feedback.
Could we add to this or just, it would just have to be approved by the attorney if we add?
Whatever feedback you give me tonight or in the next week or so, I will take back to the attorneys and ask them to wordsmith for us. And I don't have to have discussion tonight. If you want to think about it and then send it to Dr. D and let me know what we need to do prior to the next board meeting. Because if we don't hear anything, then we'll put it on the consent agenda as is.
One of the things that comes to my mind, like quickly, and maybe I'm thinking too much or not thinking too much into it, but it says, when a controversial subject arises in the classroom, teachers may use the opportunity to teach about the controversy. To me, it says, it may limit what teachers can teach. Teachers should be able to teach controversial subjects, perhaps, not just when the controversial, I cannot say that word, controversial subject maybe gets brought up, like let's say in an election year or something like that.
Correct.
I mean, but a teacher that can do that because obviously throughout history, there's controversial topics
Right.
that can be taught. So
Yes.
it's not just when something comes up, a teacher has that ability to teach those
Yes.
potentially controversial.
And in this one, it just says when it arises in the classroom.
I know, that makes me feel like.
So that means not because, I didn't take it as when it arises in society, just if the teacher's teaching on that subject
And
arising in the classroom. It's
and
not
in the
necess-
class-
Yeah,
it becomes controversial, then they
Right,
just need to
right,
present. all
right, not that
subjects.
it's the current topic, say.
Right, that's what
Yeah.
it made me feel like, it's
Yeah.
only when it's like becomes up.
And I took it the opposite way. that
Okay, good.
Just, not to change what you're saying, but
No, if you
I
read
took
it,
it a little differently, that if it arises in the classroom, it may not be a current issue
yes.
now, but it's still a controversial
Okay.
topic.
UFOs, UFOs.
There we go.
Could be. Yeah, I might want to take some time and submit. I don't know that things are gonna just go to my mind.
Right, yeah,
Thank you.
but
for
that one's a good,
Yeah.
one to think about too, the wording.
This is something that has come up in the last year or so. So when it came through as one that KASB had updated, I felt like we needed to get it to you fairly quickly because that's something that we hear about, especially in election years. You mentioned elections and, you know, I can't stand up here and say, this is the way I believe, so you must only hear this side of the agenda, the political agenda. During an election year, we need to teach all sides of what they're talking about, so we can make informed decisions, so.
Well, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. So when we adopt these, and then how is this communicated out and then how is it going to be regulated? Because I feel like we have kind of an issue, like you said, this is coming up quite a bit in our district, so.
So as it was brought to our attention in the past, then we worked with the building administrator and the teacher to help them understand what the policy said was required. And it would be the same.
And if they continue to do it, then what?
It will go to Dr. Joe now as a personnel issue. So,
I like the fact that we're dropping words and it's more concise. So appreciate that.
anytime you make a list, I personally feel anytime you make that, you know, when they listed certain things on here, well, then it's, well, what if, can I teach this then? So by taking that out on this particular policy, I think was probably wise. Okay, Michelle?
And just to remind everybody, if you have any questions or you want any changes on that, just submit it through email. This is the first one call.
So in the past, we've had kids in school, you know, your kids have that vision and hearing screenings and dental screenings. Since 2019, they've been in the process of actually updating the vision requirements. So it's always been a Kansas statutes that we follow. So in the past, it was vision was every 2 years for every student. It could be more often if they needed it. And if they were new to the district, then we did vision screening on them when they came into the district. And hearing was every 3 years. The same kind of criteria, although we went ahead and just did them together because it was easier for our nurses just to do the screenings and keep on top of it if we just did them all together. So this year it was a new statute that was passed for vision, and they're mandating the actual grades that have to be screened instead of like every 2 years. So now it's early childhood. Every year in early childhood is kindergarten, first, second, and third grade. And then it's 5th grade, 7th grade, and 10th grade. So now they're mandating the actual years that we're doing it. And I think they're looking at the fact that in those formative years, a lot of times that is when you see the changes in vision. So they want us to be screening more often in those years. And then as they get older, most kids usually know if they have a vision problem by the time they're a 10th grader. So that's what this policy is about, is that they have changed the mandates on how often we do it. They've also made recommendations about the screening tools that we use. We've already changed to those screening tools because we knew this was coming down. So in the past, you know, for the older kids, we did, you know, the machines where you looked into, but they found that through best practice, those really are not the best screening tools. So now really we're using all charts, different charts based on the age of the child, if they can read letters or they can't read letters, that kind of thing. There's also a machine that you can use and the child doesn't actually have to do anything, and they really don't want us using those except for the children that really are not able to do the vision screening, then we are able to use that machine. We do have one at Garfield. That's really the only school that we really use it at.
So Michelle has had the same guidelines throughout the years from the state. And we haven't ever had a policy that addressed what she did. With the change this year in the vision, KASB came up with wording for a policy. So this is a brand new policy. There's no change in wording to show you because this is brand new, but it pretty much just goes through each of the screenings, the vision, the hearing, the dental, and lines that out with the years that she mentioned.
And these are screenings that are, like, parents are notified and then yay or nay on whether they want that.
Well, vision and hearing screenings, in the yearbook, I mean, in the handbook, it says that there'll be vision and hearing screenings on kids. So parents aren't necessarily given a date that says we're going to do vision and hearing screenings. For dental screenings, yes. We actually don't do the dental screenings. Lifetime Smiles from Genesis comes in and does it. So permission forms go home for those, for dental screenings. And we do once in a while have a parent that says, I don't want my child to have it done because we just went to the dentist and we don't see any reason for them to have it done. Most of the time, parents don't care. It's a quick 30-second look in their mouth, and then they get notification of whether or not there's recommendation that their child see a dentist or not. So.
And I wasn't trying to bring up controversy or that. I just thought it was something that'd be good for people that maybe aren't aware of that. Those are done.
What would be some examples of selected screenings? The last tab there where it says there's other screening.
Well, because there's a colorblind screening. We usually do that in kindergarten. We only do that one time. Stereopsis, which is really how well your eyes work together. That is also part of the screening that we do. So you have far vision, you have near vision. We don't do near vision on the younger students. We do near vision on the older students. So those would be some of the other screenings that, and there's other screenings that you can do, especially with younger children. Kind of the same thing about how well, do their eyes move together. Some other screening tools, but just in general, the ones we do are far vision screenings. We do stereopsis, which is the one that tells me, how well your eyes are working together. And we do that on, well, we used to not do that on all the students, but this says that we need to do it on all the students now. We used to do it on elementary age school students. We didn't do it on the older kids. And color blindness, we do that at kindergarten. And that's really just a recommendation. That's really not something that's really required in this policy. It's just something that we do. And once in a while we do, we pick up a few maybe students that we refer for that. So.
The sickle cell, that's a recommendation by law, right?
Now that's something that I've not seen before, so.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting.
Sickle cell's done now prenatal. I mean, when they do all the prenatal testing. So I guess, if you were born here and had prenatal testing done, postnatal, I'm sorry, when they're born, the baby's has a.
I just envision that as maybe
But we don't
someone that's
do any
come
sickle
in,
cell.
maybe from overseas or from.
We don't do any sickle cell.
It's
This
interesting.
is the location of the nearest facility.
Yeah, so.
And on that slide, it says selected screening or other screening procedures deemed appropriate. Is that outside of vision and dental and hearing? It's like those other types of health screenings?
The only other screenings that we have done, well, we used to do scoliosis, but we haven't done that for years and years. We do asthma screening for 5th graders, and the hospital comes in and does that, and that's also a parent permission form. We haven't done it for the last 2 years. But the respiratory therapists from the hospital actually come in, and they're the ones that really do the testing. We just assist them with it. We don't really do that. So those are really the only screenings. And heights and weights, I'm sorry, I guess so you could count those as screenings too. We do heights and weights on students up to 6th grade.
What kind of screenings for physical, or is it physical or occupation? What would therapy, like I'm thinking fine motor.
So those
Would be under
those
like an
considered
IEP.
Yeah, those fall under the special education realm. So
Okay.
those are with parent
Oh,
permission.
TPT.
Mhm.
Right, that's what I
But we do those screenings if it's part of the process that's been given.
Is that covered here? That's a sped. Those are under sped.
Those are more under special ed.
And that would be the physical therapist coming in and doing that, or the occupational therapist doing those screenings, providing those services.
So same thing on this, it's a first read, so if you have questions, thoughts, requests, let us know and we'll work on those. And if we don't hear anything, any changes to bring you, then we will put it on the consent agenda.
Thank you.
Move on to the AP Elementary School property.
Good time, Ms. Cunningham.
Good evening. This is mine by default, just so y'all know. This didn't start out as mine. So there is property at AP Hubert. I'm sure you all are kind of familiar with the water tower, the city of Garden City's water tower. So to make you all aware, you're both my client. City of Garden City is my client, school district's my client. So if you all get into a controversy over it, you're both gonna have to get different counsel. Only if you both agree can I represent your interests. This came up before you got a new superintendent, before Dr. D was here, and then also before you got a new like grounds superintendent when John Geist was still here. And the pressure behind this and why this issue arose was because T-Mobile is really pushing their person who oversees the cell towers for not just T-Mobile, but T-Mobile, AT&T, Verizon, kind of everybody. And so in the past, they had a lease option with you all to be able to put a cell tower and have services on this location on your property. That lease option was expired. And so over this period of time, his name's Troy, he's the person who works for this company, started reaching out to John Geist, kind of pushing this idea of, hey, we need a new lease option, we need a new lease option, we need, trying to get him to do it. And the issue that John had was that the sliver of property was partially on city, partially on school district. And so John brought up the idea of somebody needs to own all of this property so that this issue doesn't come up and isn't in controversy. And he said, I think it's just a little sliver. And rather than asking the school district to go out and survey that, I went directly to the city and said, hey, can you guys have this surveyed? That's what they would normally do anyways. They surveyed the property and determined the boundary inside the fence. It ended up, instead of being a sliver on one side, it ended up being almost like an L sliver. So down one side and down the other side, almost like an L shape. When I met with Dr. Carlin about it, he said that's a little more property than I initially anticipated. And so it's not something I feel comfortable just administratively handling. It's something that the board needs to look at, which was totally fine. And so kind of set out there a while just because there was a transition between Dr. Carlin and Dr. Dominguez. And so it was something that didn't get taken care of. And then John left. And so he was kind of out of the loop. And so then Troy, who's the person who works for the cell tower company, stopped calling John and started calling me, asking me if I could get one of the two sides to complete a lease with him. He has a lease ready to go. I think he was attempting to have that lease go before the city. I pulled that and asked them not to have that lease go before the city because they can't lease something that they don't own or that they don't own the whole thing of. And so really what the determination is whether or not the school board owns a portion of this, the city owns a portion. So the city can't give up land that they have on the water tower, obviously. So really the only option is either to you all complete a lease with this cell company, renew a lease with them, if that's something that you're interested in, or if you're interested in giving this property or selling this property or however you want to do it, whatever you want this to look like, going down that road and having the city own all of that property so that they can enter in a lease agreement with this person to put up a cell tower. I think the only thing that I think the person who's pushing it the hardest, the person who's the most interested is the cell company because of T-Mobile coming in and them not being able to provide coverage. I asked a lot of questions about why is this so important? Why is this trying to be moved so quickly? What are the issues? And that's really the bottom of the issue that I can get to. So I'm happy to answer any questions you have. I wasn't part of the start of this, so I don't have a lot of background information. I went through all of your old leases. And I've spent a lot of time on the phone with this Troy individual who works for the cell company. And then I've also spent quite a bit of time talking to Fred Jones and Mike Muirhead about this as well. And they both understand that this is an issue that has to come before you all before it can come to anybody else, so.
What is the value of the lease agreement?
So the last one that is in here, which is what I would say is the most recent. Dr. Dominguez, did they get all of this in their packet? Okay, so if you can refer to the 2013, this was actually the most recent, which is not very good. So we would be, if you guys were going to enter in a lease agreement with them, you would want to ask them for a new lease agreement because this was just an option to lease. This wasn't actually the lease agreement itself. And so what the value of that would be, I would have to ask them for a lease agreement to be able to tell you.
You say he had one ready to go. Does it have a value tied to it?
So he gave one, he reached out to the city and asked them to put one on their agenda for their next meeting. And they reached out to me and said, hey, do you feel comfortable having this on our next meeting? And I said, no, because there's something in a lease agreement that says that we warranty that we can provide free and clear title and that we can give those to someone. Well, we can't do that in this situation. And so we would either have to remove that clause, which makes the lease invaluable to them, or we would have to say, no, stop. This isn't the appropriate method. And I've explained that to them as well. I mean, I'll tell them that's who the overall company is. I've explained that to them. I've explained to them that there's a process that this must go through in order for, and he didn't seem to care. I don't think that there was an issue as to who he leased it from. He just wanted to lease it, whoever he could lease it through the quickest, I think was the goal. And I think the issue that Dr. Carlin and the previous John Geis brought up was just that the issue that they were running into is that this property was partially city, partially school district. And so, you know, did you want to continue down that path or did you want to do something different? And that's why it came up. And yes, Dr. Dominguez.
No, and just make sure everybody sees that. So it says ends 9/1/14, 5-year renewal, 806 a month. So grand total of.
Yeah, right. That was the old one.
That's the old.
Yep.
I don't know. Someone asked about pricing. I don't know that.
It would probably be a little more than that, I would guess. You know, that'd be something that we would negotiate if we got to that point. I mean, obviously on your behalf.
So what, you know, in talking to John, what maintenance or what?
It's fenced in, so we're not doing anything to that.
It's been, so I think initially what happened is they fenced it in because everyone, I think the belief was that the water, when they initially fenced it, I think they believed, or somebody believed whoever put up that fence, whether it was the school district, the city at the time, that they were fencing out the water tower property because it belonged to the city. But what whoever put up the fence wasn't thinking or realizing was that that was part of the school district property. So when this initially came up, that's why the lease was with the school district, because it was on school district property. But since it was fenced in, the city was taking care of everything inside there because of the water tower and for that protection. And so I think the issue between John and maybe the city that came up the way that I understand it was they were talking about, well, we either need to move the fence or we need to, you know, the city needs to own all the property inside of the fence if it's going to be their water tower, or the fence needs to be moved so that the water tower is fenced out, because we don't want, I think the issue was, is there a liability if another entity has access to the water tower? And so I think that was part of the discussion. And then I think the other part of the discussion between John is, because they had never surveyed it, is they just thought that it was just like this small sliver on one side. And they were like, this is no big deal. Like, we should just initially just like give this and be done with it. And so obviously getting it surveyed was important. And it's not, again, it's not a huge chunk, but it does create like an L inside that fence. That is more than was initially thought, which is why Dr. Carlin didn't feel comfortable with the decision and felt that it should be a decision made by the board.
So is the blue line?
Yep, correct. So the red line is where the fence currently is. The blue line is where they thought the property line was. So if you look, I don't know if you can pull that up. So basically what you would essentially, if you were giving this, what you would essentially be given is the difference between the red and the blue. That's how it's supposed to be. This is not accurate. So essentially it comes down, it goes like this, and it cuts off. Yes, oh yes, you're actually asking about the fence. So the fence is this blue line. Yep, but see, they didn't actually draw. See, the fence actually goes here and down. So what the blue line is what the actual property is. This is actual city property inside the blue. And then this red is school district property. But if you look, this fence actually comes over and around this building. So the fence is actually on both property and the buildings are on both property. So I think that's kind of why this came up, is just in trying to figure out and make some solutions. And if you look at the red line goes all the way around the outside of the property. So.
And what are those buildings?
I'm not entirely sure.
Pump stations for the water tower.
If you look at the fence, they're fenced in with the water tower.
You see one's electrical.
Well, also there's cell service, I think, that comes off of that top of that tower, as well as internet.
Do we know what the property value is of just that sliver?
I don't.
So we would sell it to the city, or they would?
The initial proposal I think the initial idea was that John and Mike and Fred were going to get together and just propose it to the two administrators, and they were just going to pass the land that had all of the city property on it, and they were gonna move the fence and fence in the whole red area. I think that's initially what both sides had intended to do. But as they started down that path, Mike and I had a conversation. I said, you really need to survey this to make sure that we truly understand what piece of property we're talking about, so that both sides can look at this in the full scope. And as soon as they did that, Dr. Brown looked at it, he was like, it's not what I thought it was. It's something different. It's a little bit more than that. And he didn't feel comfortable with the two administrators making the decision. And that's why, and really there's no decision for the city to make, because you all own the property. So until such time that you either offer it to them free or offer to them for a price, there's really nothing for them to consider. I think the only reason that they were drawn into this is because Troy, the person who works for the cell company, was reaching out to both sides, trying to push somebody to make a decision so that they could get this service up and running. And then that kind of obviously motivated everybody else to look at it and then determine that there was this issue.
Well, oh, that's right. You're representing everybody, so you can't recommend to one individual.
Nope, I can't make any recommendations to you. It's something that you all, and you don't have to make a decision tonight. I mean, Troy would have liked you to make a decision a month ago or 3 months ago or 5 months ago. And as I told the city, my other client, we can't sign a lease on something that we don't own. So, any lease, and you guys can put this off to another meeting. I think the T-Mobile store that he was concerned about was opening, and his description to me was he can't sell phones without getting this lease under wrap. But that's not necessarily a you problem. That's a
They could up their lease amount if it's really that important to them.
Yeah.
So I would like to know what a lease amount is.
okay.
I would also, and then there's value to be extracted here from the district, so. I don't recommend as a board, we just give that to the city.
I agree.
I do hope that we can talk in terms of cleaning this thing up for the city and for any providers that might be out there, because, rural service in this form is a huge issue. And then the fiber optics network that it takes to get good, quick cell service rurally is huge. I'd hate to be in the way in any manner for that progress to occur. So I'm hopeful that we can talk about what it takes to get it all over to the city, particularly since property slices buildings in there and et cetera, so that we can just clean this up and let progress continue.
And also just if it does get into negotiations or anything where the two sides can't agree, as I said before, the school district will have to seek other counsel, as will the city. I won't be able to represent either one of you in that process if you guys don't agree on something. If you agree on something and it's just memorializing what you agree, then that's okay. But if there's any sort of, we can't agree or we want to, do anything like that, then, that's something that I'll have to step back from.
So can we also just move status quo or we continue whatever lease agreement we agree with that company?
I think part of
I wouldn't
As-
recommend that because you still have the problem.
as long as I think the issue that they're having is that they're fenced inside a property that everybody assumed to be the city, and all the property inside that fence, the buildings and the water tower and all that belong to the city. And so trying to bifurcate, I think one of the two things needs to happen. If you do continue on with that lease, then somebody probably has to change the fencing and
Buildings.
and the buildings and some of that kind of stuff so that there's not dual access for both sides.
But do they put it on the water tower? They put those.
They don't put it on the water tower, but it's on the property inside of the fence.
Those questions getting answered.
Yep, so you guys would like to see what a lease looks like. Maybe we could probably get from them the information on if they have any preferences or any way to solve this, whether they would pay for any fencing or anything that would keep it separate from the other property. I mean, that might be something to consider as well.
I would like to see a proposal on the purchase by the city from USD-457, if that's what we're gonna do, to square this up, as presumably a survey is gonna be involved, and let them.
Survey's already been done.
Okay,
Yep, survey's already been done.
basically the red line.
Yep, the red line is the survey of the property.
So a proposal to move it wholly over to the city. The lease thing I'm uncomfortable with because of the dual ownership of, you have buildings and such and fences and such here that are partly on district property and partly on city property. And that's not a way to run ownership on either side. And the logical thing to me is to entertain a proposal to move it all over to the city.
I'll get all
We don't have to
the,
accept it, but at least we would have, okay, what does this take to clean it up?
I think we were just saying it can't be just given, there's value to the school district that we have to consider. So if it's a sale or the lease, one way, the school district should get their value.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
So
I
in
agree.
light of that, then, okay, that's the statement. What's their proposal? If they don't have any proposal, then we're still in an interesting place.
yeah, and I don't think the issue was, I don't think they brought the issue. So I think that's kind of the crux of the situation is the city didn't bring the
So could
issue.
we come back to that and say, reword that and say, could we have a proposal from the city?
Yeah. I mean, I think you could ask them for one, but they didn't, since they probably would have come with a proposal if they would have thought that that was something that was their idea, but really this was all conjured up by a third party. And that's kind of how we got here.
Probably to determine that value, they're gonna wanna know, city will wanna know what that lease amount is regardless.
Yeah.
And that'll play into the value that will want for sale.
It says two, so we know what's worth.
Yeah, exactly.
So we need to know what the lease, if we could have a lease, what that lease would look like.
Sure. I can get that information to Dr. Dominguez.
And or the sale also, Mark, is that what you're saying? The sale?
Well, then, as I hear
That we
more
cleaned it up.
discussion is therefore
Value of
that
the land.
that would suggest or imply value of the land. The improvements are weird. They're just sort of half owned, and so I
Yeah.
think, and improvements. So an appraisal I don't know how you even do an appraisal, so
Yeah.
the lease seems to suggest value. And so if we can have the lease and then maybe a proposal from the city, if they want to provide one, to move it over to the city.
Sure. I can pass that information along. Yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Thought there were more questions. Okay.
And we have another topic that we moved from the consent agenda, I believe.
And Colleen can jump out there, but basically, this was pulled off the consent agenda, but basically just since in Kansas, the cash-based law, we're not under the gap. And that is by statute. So therefore, Colleen, you want to jump in, the district is not required to follow the gap procedures, and then therefore, the gap requirements would require fixed assets accounting. And then that was from the Director of School Finance for KSDE. So anyway, and just trying to get some clarity or clarification on what that really meant. And as far as following the gap, generally accepted accounting principles is municipalities or in Kansas are not under that. Basically, is what he said.
Yes, sir. I think the question came from me. I called Dr. Dominguez today about this. And I guess I just want clarity or more information on this. Is this something that we do every year? Is this a change in our accounting way of doing things? Or is this how we've done it for years? Because as I read it, I couldn't tell if this was something we're doing this year or if it was something that we've been doing for years. So.
Yeah, it's a resolution that we adopt every single year. Schools are exempt from the GAP principles mainly because of how we do the cash basis law. So we've done it every year. All school districts across the state of Kansas will adopt the resolution that say that we're exempt. Also followed up with our CTA auditors too at Lewis, Hoover, and Dick. So the district isn't required, this is their response. So the district isn't required to follow GAP. It's easier for the public and board to understand financial statements that are presented on the same basis of accounting that is used for the district's budget preparation. In addition, GAP requirements would require fixed asset accounting with depreciation calculations and long-term debt accounting. Both add time and cost to the district's financial accounting processes and to the audit while providing little cost benefit to the financial statement users.
There's just
Standard practice.
in every district in Kansas, 284, 86, some do it, so.
Other special districts, like groundwater management districts, do it annually as well.
Okay. That was my question. Thank you for the explanation and thanks for reaching out to our accountants.
Yep.
Good question.
So then, will we need a motion for that also? I believe. Okay.
Madam President,
Go ahead, you have it. Go ahead.
Madam President, I move we adopt the resolution regulating the requirements of accounting and auditing on the basis of generally accepted accounting principles and fixed assets for fiscal year 2022 through 2023. Adopt as presented.
I'll second that.
It's been moved in second. Any other questions or discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passed. And we will move on to board open discussion. Any volunteers?
I don't have anything really specific other than just a quick comment. I really appreciate being able to pull off the reconstruction of reorganization of spend and have that conversation. It's always awkward in our process. It's expedient, but it's awkward to approve budget changes or personnel changes before we've had presentation of program that drives those activities. So I appreciate that.
John, you have anything?
I just, this obviously being some of us new board members, our first meeting of a new school year, and there was a lot on the consent agenda. And I had a lot of questions and I appreciate everyone answering my questions and explaining that to us as we go through it for the first time. I really do appreciate that. And so looking forward to the school year.
Dana?
With that, I'm really excited about our upcoming enrollment event. Woo-hoo. I think this will be really exciting and really nice for parents to kind of have a one-stop shop. I think, is that kind of what I feel like it's intended to be. So
I really appreciate, we had some feedback from teachers about maybe some questions that they were getting, and Dr. Dominguez man got that out like immediately on social media, was like, because I know some of the questions were if we pre-enrolled, if we did some of that stuff in May, do we need to do this as well? And so we put that out there. Got that going, so thank you for that. It's awesome, and I hope we have a great turnout. And I think in the past, you know, I've mentioned like all the I cannot speak, it is a Monday, all the coaches working with our athletes over the summer, but just looking through some stuff, maybe not in a timely manner, but going through other things where our teachers have asked to look at the new textbooks, the new curriculum to already get started. So our teachers are always, in my opinion, working even through the summer. Sometimes we hear comments that, you know, teachers have the summers off, but I don't know a whole lot of teachers that completely take a summer off. And I think I really want to note that and you know, communicate how appreciative that I, as a board member, am of all that extra work that they're willing to do on their own time. So.
Can we? Randy?
I just met a lot of new people already and I appreciate it. And I again thank everybody for the humbling and welcome that I've had. So it's been great. Thank you.
Before I know it, school will be started, so. And I want to thank everyone that reaches out to me, as I've served as board chair. If you have questions, you're not afraid to ask or bring it up, or put something out that maybe wasn't in my main focus, but is, and we're able to discuss it at the meeting. So thank you for that. That's all I had. Dr. Dominguez?
It's been exciting. It's been exciting months, and just the enrollment that will take place the next couple of days. We had a run through with staff personnel today. It was, you know, you do to reflect, you get to look at it, get to reflect on it. And, you know, I think we're going to have a few more tweaks, but yeah, it's going to be exciting, and we're just going to keep moving forward and get everybody enrolled, and it's exciting for the next year.
Okay, and the next board meeting will be in the Board of Education room on Monday, July 25th at 6 p.m. So we will move into executive session.
Madam President, I move we go into executive session for how many?
I don't think it'll take very long.
Hopefully 12, but let's say 15, hopefully 12.
It says 12, so.
15 minutes to discuss a personnel matter pursuant to the non-elected personnel exception under KOMA, beginning at 8:15. And the open meeting will resume in the board meeting room at 8:30. I would like to invite Dr. Dominguez, Glenda LaBarbera, and Jennifer Cunningham to join us in executive session.
1 second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.